Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we will not be discussing Game 55 of the regular season. We will not be discussing just how demolished the San Jose Sharks got by the Nashville Predators and how they had suffered their worst loss in a very long time, not just this season, but for many years, when they lose 8-0 to this Nashville squad. We won't be mentioning any of that. Why is that? Well, why should I bother to actually analyze this sorry excuse of a game that the Sharks just put up here tonight when they couldn't even be bothered to put up a halfway decently competitive performance here tonight? At the very least, in those last couple of games where the Sharks were heavily outplayed against the Vegas Golden Knights and the Boston Bruins, in which they only managed to get 17 or so shots on net, at the very least those games were kept close on the scoreboard, which would give it some sort of essence of that game was actually somewhat close. Even when you take a deeper look at it, it was clear that the Sharks were outmatched. But here tonight, there was just nothing of the sort. I mean, me just turning on the camera and filling out the whiteboard for this video is already more effort than Mark-Edouard Vlasic put in here tonight. So at this point, there's not even any reason to dwell on this. So you'll likely get a very short video here tonight, but there are still a couple of things that I do want to talk about, not necessarily related to this game. And the first one is just the general feeling now around the San Jose Sharks. You know, I remember a few years ago, back when the Sharks were a pretty consistent playoff team, they had only missed in the 2015 season, but before that and in the few years after that, they just consistently made the playoffs. You came into every single game hoping for a victory, but expecting still a very, very competitive performance from the San Jose Sharks. And I often wondered how fans of teams that weren't really, expected to make the playoffs at all, how they managed to make it through a long and grueling 82-game schedule, 82-game season. Teams like the Carolina Hurricanes at the time, the Toronto Maple Leafs at the time, the Buffalo Sabres, the Arizona Coyotes, fans of these teams knew by November, usually, that their team was not even going to make it to the playoffs, were not even going to be competitive. Sometimes they even knew by game 1 of October, that they were not really going to go anywhere in particular that season. And like I said, I often wondered how exactly they managed to make it through the year. And now here we are, halfway or over halfway through a third straight season in which the Sharks will almost certainly miss the playoffs. And now I'm dealing with those exact problems that I wondered how others managed to deal with, and it is definitely extremely tough. I am having to keep on these games just so I can make these videos and actually review these terrible performances that the Sharks do end up putting up, but even I will admit that by the time that this game was 6-0, I was more so looking at my phone than I was actually looking at the television, and so I didn't even really see the 7th and 8th goal here tonight. It's just very tough to move through with this. The moment where you go from expecting your team to, or hoping for your team to win, but expecting a competitive performance, to hoping that your team is going to put up a competitive performance and not really hoping for any sort of victory to come out of it, that's when you know your team is kind of a bit of a lost cause at this point, and that's seemingly where we are with just about 27 games remaining on the schedule for the San Jose Sharks. The other thing that I do want to talk about is actually some comments a comment that Bob Booner made earlier today, which was that if this team could just go on a run, they could end up being close to a playoff spot. And there's just a couple of things that I want to talk about just based on that comment. And the first one is kind of how silly it sounds when you actually listen to it. The team just needs to go on a run, so basically a winning streak, for them to get close to a playoff spot, not even necessarily be in a playoff spot after a winning streak. The Sharks are just so far out of it at this point, many points out of it with so many teams in front of them, that even a winning streak wouldn't get them a spot in the playoffs. It would only just get them back into the thick of a playoff race. That just kind of sounds really sad when you think about it for a couple of moments. And the second thing is, obviously you might want to say, well, if you're going to ask Bob Booner if playoffs are still in reach, what could he possibly actually say that's in any way respectable and keeps up the image of the team? You can't obviously sit there and say, no, clearly we're not going to make the playoffs, we've already given up. You have to sort of keep up the air that you're trying to do it. But there's this one thing about doing that in the media and saying, yeah, of course we're still pushing for a playoff spot, but then, actually kind of adapting your coaching to not doing that. But that's not what's happening here with Bob Booner. He's clearly convinced 100%, although maybe that will change after this game, that this team is still going to try and make the playoffs, because we consistently still see games from players like Jeff Viel, Nick Bonino, Andrew Cogliano, who have been playing terribly thus far this season, but according to Bob Booner are giving the San Jose Sharks a better chance of winning this game. We're consistently seeing Brent Burns get 30 minutes or close to 30 minutes a night. We're consistently seeing the San Jose Sharks overworking goaltenders like James Reimer just so that they could have a slightly higher chance of actually being able to win these games. We saw them go out and trade for Alex Stalock, and while they didn't actually give up any assets for this trade, but it's just the fact that they were so hesitant of playing a rookie goaltender, Zach Sawchenko, that they decided to go for a player like Alex Stalock to try and marginally, ever so slightly, and that's even arguable, increase their chances at still making it to the playoffs. It's just an absolutely sad state of affairs when you could go into the Barracuda, who by the way are also struggling very hard this season. You could pick up some younger players, maybe give them an opportunity, a Blickfeld, a Shimolevsky, we can get back Helbegawatz, but no, we need to keep these absolute plugs and pylons into the bottom six for the San Jose Sharks. Players who have had chance after chance after chance after chance after chance after chance, and I could probably sit here and say the word chance 40 times because that's just how many games some of these players have played. They're given so many opportunities, they never or almost never are able to actually take advantage of those opportunities, and yet they are still consistently given lineup spots for absolutely zero justification. It's just, I'm honestly at a loss for words. I just can't continue to come up with just things to say at this point from the San Jose Sharks team, which just continues to have absolutely awful performances, at least early on in this season. Yeah, there were a couple of blunders. That 7-1 loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning definitely was quite ugly, but at least even in games where the Sharks were relatively outplayed or pretty significantly outplayed, the score was usually kept somewhat close. I mean, you could take a look at that game against the Pittsburgh Penguins that they ended up losing 8-6. Yeah, they fell behind 6-1, but they had a nice little comeback that made it interesting. But ever since the return from the Olympic break, it just seems the Sharks have absolutely zero fight in them. It's not even fun to watch. It's not even interesting to watch. Like I said, I'm only going into games at this point hoping for a relatively competitive performance from the San Jose Sharks, and I have rarely been able to even get that as of late. Class dismissed.